The topic that I wanted to talk about this morning is, or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country or the planet, is a laboratory, a pharmaceutical laboratory that makes generic drugs. It's actually shipping its jobs over to a different country. And this is relevant because it shows you just how the financial interests of our politicians play a huge role in the decisions they make or whether or not they intervene on certain issues, right? So let's give you the details on that. So there's a critical plant that manufactures critical generic drugs in the state of West Virginia. Of course, that's the state where Joe Manchin happens to be a senator. And they are deciding to move their operations abroad, threatening America's generic drug supply, which is something we should be very thoughtful about considering the fragility of our supply chains, what we experienced during coronavirus, but it's also outsourcing thousands of unionized jobs. So Vanity Fair did an excellent job with this piece. I highly recommend you guys check it out and read the entirety of it. It has all these details and tidbits that we can't get into for the purposes of this show right now. But they write that Mylan Laboratories has made 61 drug products, including a substantial portion of the world's supply of a critical thyroid medicine. It's 1,431 highly trained workers. That includes analytical chemists, industrial engineers, and senior janitors among them are represented by the Steelworkers Union. All are slated to be laid off by the month's end, meaning literally today. It's the last day of July. And just to give you a sense of how much downsizing had already happened with this laboratory, at its height back in 2016, the Morgantown manufacturing site employed more than 3,700 full-time employees and made more than 1,400 drug products, a scale that dwarfs most American drug manufacturing sites, according to FDA records. And so when the Steelworkers Union approached Joe Manchin, they're trying to get in touch with him. They're like, look, Joe Manchin says he cares about unionized jobs. He says he cares about jobs in the state of West Virginia most of all. So we just need to get a meeting with him. We need to talk with him, and I'm sure he'll intervene. Except the opposite happened. They get in touch with him. He's on the Senate floor. He gives them a brief 10-minute conversation over the phone. And here's what he says to them. Sorry about your luck. It sounds like they've reached a corporate decision. There's very little I can do. There's
nothing to be done. Nothing to be done.
No. I mean, right now, he's like, puffing up his chest and walking around the Senate floor like he's the actual president of the United States. He understands the kind of power he has. But when it comes to this laboratory, when it comes to these jobs in West Virginia, he's not doing anything. Why? Well, this laboratory recently did a merger. And in the process of that merger, his daughter, who was an executive at Mylan, receives a $30.8 million golden parachute, and her buddies are still working at Mylan as executives. So let's not stir the pot. My daughter's making a buck off this, and we don't want to upset anyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things in America. The political system is not geared toward protecting jobs or anything like that. I mean, it's just fully dedicated to protecting corporate profits, even if that means decimating local jobs. I mean, politicians often, are stressed a lot about like jobs in their state and things like that. And like there was the whole story of Chuck Schumer, trying to, give massive subsidies to, like microchip manufacturers to bring jobs to his state or whatever. But like when push comes to shove, they will never do it in a way that threatens corporate profits. They'll do it by, offering these like insane tax breaks and things like that, like just giving them more money to like beg them to stay in the state. And then often they don't anyway. I mean, but there are, it's the government. They can do things like there are things to be done. There is industrial policy to be done. They can start their own, they can take over factories. They can force companies to stay here. There's a million things that they can do, but there's this kind of learned helplessness from our political class that is just like, what are we supposed to do? We're just the government. We can't intervene in the economy. Like that'd be crazy. We would never intervene in the economy. And then in the case of Manchin, obviously there's this comical, just kind of just comical conflict of interest with his daughter making tens of millions of dollars. I mean, it's a perfect microcosm of what our government is vis-a-vis its role in the economy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Joe Manchin is like a walking sign for everything that's wrong in our federal government, right? Because he's a walking conflict of interest, because this is just one of those conflicts of interest. Another conflict of interest is his personal investment in a hotel chain in his own state, which is why he didn't want to increase the federal minimum wage. That would actually hurt his bottom line. Then we found out recently that he's receiving nearly $500,000 a year off of his investments in dirty coal in the state of West Virginia. Like, he is literally financially incentivized to work against us. Doesn't matter if he's a Democrat, doesn't matter if he's a Republican. And so, like, when I take a step back and I think about what are the solutions, right? Because, you know, we're about to talk about the eviction moratorium ending, and you look at the federal government and it's just dog crap. It's absolute garbage. I mean, what we're seeing in the way that they're handling the infrastructure bill, in the way that they've responded to the economic concerns of people who are still laid off, still don't have their jobs, and are about to get evicted. I mean, it shows you how broken that system is. And Democrats are unwilling to use the tools in their toolbox that, honestly, as much as I can't stand the guy, Donald Trump had no problem using obscure rules and provisions to get what he wants. Democrats aren't willing to do it.
Of course not. And you bring up the eviction moratorium, which just expired. And, you know, aside from the human catastrophe that is, right? Millions of people potentially evicted in the coming months. You know, all these people are behind on their rent. There's been no rental assistance. There's just been this eviction moratorium, which, like, is the absolute bare minimum thing with, you know, to be done in a case like the coronavirus pandemic. But if you zoom out from a political level, from a political standpoint, you know, a Republican that runs in the 2022 election can easily say, when we were in power, we protected you from getting evicted. And then the Democrats got in power and they let you get evicted. You know, like, and they would be correct about that. Like, they would be 100% correct about that. When we control the government with Trump and we control the Senate and the House, we passed an eviction moratorium. When the Democrats got in there, they took it away.
Yeah.
And what's the argument against?
Absolutely right. I mean, like, the accurate argument would be, but I mean, it's a weak argument, but the accurate argument would be, yeah, you guys had that moratorium, but you let BlackRock evict hundreds of people anyway. You didn't actually enforce the moratorium. And by the way, those evictions continued during Biden's administration as well. That's why it's an incredibly weak argument. But in terms of messaging, we already know what the story is. We know that the Democratic Party really fails in aggressive messaging, especially when Republicans tend to have a point. And in this case, they absolutely do have a point. What is amazing to me is that everything in the federal government is so overpowered by corporate donors that Democrats can't even see straight. They can't even see the damage that they're doing to their own political careers because they're following along with what the corporate donors want. I mean, these landlords, corporate landlords, they don't want the moratorium to continue. I mean, BlackRock just snatched up a bunch of single family homes. They want a return on that investment. They want to be able to evict the people who are unable to pay their rent. And so I have no doubt that these are the kinds of conversations that are taking place behind closed doors. I mean, this is not the United States of America. This is the Chamber of Commerce, you know, the United States of Chamber of Commerce. Like, that's what this is at this point. And that's the problem. And it doesn't matter if Democrats are, you know, kicking their own asses and hurting their own political futures. They're just going to keep doing this. And it's pathetic.
Yeah, I mean, and it just goes to show. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, the speaker of the House, the leader of the Democrats in Congress, you know, the nominal kind of left of center party in the United States, faced with this kind of absolute human catastrophe that's coming. You know, I think there's as many as 6 million people that are behind on their rent. There's no rental assistance coming. With landlords able to evict these people, there's nothing stopping them from doing it. And she didn't even know about it. I mean, Kale, can you pull up the tweet? She goes, Pelosi says part of the problem was last minute notice from White House about the need to handle legislatively. Really, we only learned about this yesterday. Not really enough time to socialize it within our caucus to build the consensus necessary. Okay, she just had no idea that this was coming. Nothing to be, she needs to be told.
You know
like,
why?
It's not like there was like media coverage of this. And of course there was. There's been reports. There's been like, we knew the deadline. The deadline was put into the legislation in the first place. But they forgot about it, or they didn't know about it, or they didn't care about it, or they don't know anyone who's at risk, in their own social lives, because all these people are rich. Right. And it's just, to them, it's an abstraction, not a reality.
Exactly. I mean, there's the disconnect in terms of like the insane wealth that members of Congress are experiencing right now, while the majority of Americans are struggling economically. But also, I mean, the system is set up in a way to ensure that they're able to keep doing what they're doing, right? Like, I'm going to keep repeating this. The fact that they're able to be invested in individual stocks. I want to know how many members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, are personally, financially invested in corporate landlords, right? I mean, these are publicly traded corporations. Are they invested in them? And yeah. I would be shocked if they weren't. So like, that's what I'm talking about when I say conflict of interest. They're looking out for their financial interests. And actually legislating on our behalf, representing the best interests of the American people, goes against their own profit motive. That's the problem. The system is set up this way.